Week 20 begins with another day in Jericho, up north of the Dead Sea, and then spending the night in the same field outside Jericho for the third night in a row, this time just with Donna and Lynn from the kibbutz, because Hank had left and gone back to the kibbutz in his little car. We walked, we hitchhiked, and we went to Jerusalem, actually just going by at this time, and then heading down from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is south, you could just literally walk it. And that, of course, is the home of the place where Jesus was born. It was quite exciting. We saw the church, and we walked out and hitchhiked on, and we went down to Hebron. Well, in Hebron, we spent the night and outside on a hillside, sliding down all night. The next day, it's off to the Dead Sea again and the Masada National Park. You can see to the left there, which shows this mountain fortress looking out over the Dead Sea in the central part of Israel and Palestine. And at that point, we find out that Donna loses her money and has to go back to Tel Aviv, to the embassy, to get money from her home country. So now Lynn and I are just kind of casually going along down the road, and we head over to Beersheba, which is an Israeli town. And there we run into Alan and Polly. We have a great old time running around through the city there, but we want to get rid of them. The next day, Lynn and I are getting along very well. We say, come on, let's head out. We're going to head out hitchhiking down towards Eilat. And as we get down towards Eilat and the sun is going down, we decide near the Timna copper mines, well, let's spend the night in the desert. And you will hear that we have quite an adventure in the night in the desert, leading us back to the road the next day.
March the 2nd, 1971, I'm still in the wonderful city of Jericho that you see behind me. Jericho is hospitable. Jericho is an oasis in the desert, filled with palm trees. Yes, my friend Hank, who drove Donna, Lynn, and I to Jericho and our adventure on the way there through Jerusalem, he left us. The Dutch staff is gone, and now it's just me and my two lady friends from the kibbutz. We're in a lovely spot. Jericho is quite exceptional. So I write in my journal, I saw the ancient palace of Hebron from the 8th century and the walls of Jericho, the world's oldest city. The bikes have been so good for my head and body. We actually rented bicycles, and it kind of reminded me of a scene from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, when Butch and Sundance were with Catherine and they rode around on bicycles. It was a very cute scene. And that's what we felt like, very lyrical. And of course, we had a little bit of hashish, which kept us feeling like a triple God's heads type people. I write that it's been cheap, but I've got to make some money, so I don't spend much of my money that I receive from the States. I go on. Spent Monday night in the same field outside the beautiful city of Jericho. We left Jericho to a host of free food and admirers. Yesterday was a day of hitching and walking through Arab lands. We went to Bethlehem in the Church of the Nativity, a very moving early church. We walked there, me and my volunteer mates, Lynn and Donna. When you're walking and hitchhiking and going along with your backpacks on, you go by a place like Bethlehem that you've heard of your whole life, well, you got to stop in. So we went in and we walked around, and we found the wonderful Church of Nativity, which is the spot that they believe Jesus was actually born. And we walked through the streets, and it's an Arabic Christian town, and it had quite a bit of a soul to it, but it was just a simple town. It was kind of bustling, but it was no big deal. We spent a few hours, and then we went, okay, let's get moving. And we made our way down to the next town, which is called Hebron. Hebron behind me, now it's a bustling town. It had more people, and it had a vibrant market. I describe it in my journal as being one of the better markets around. Also in Hebron, again, is the cave of the patriarchs. Now, me being the dumb kid I am, I was at that time. I guess I'm still kind of dumb. I'm still learning. But we had no idea the Cave of the Patriarchs was there. I think if we knew, we would have gone to look at it. In fact, I think we actually walked right by it, but what the hell did we know? And the fact that it's supposed to have Adam and Eve in it and has all these incredible people from the Bible in it, certainly is a reason to see and be in Hebron. In fact, this is one of the places, frankly, that I really want to go back to. Well, after spending a few hours in Hebron and the hustle and bustle, we decided, let's get out of town. We didn't really see a decent hotel and didn't want to spend any money on it. Of course, we had our sleeping bags. So then we went out of the town and got a ride to sleep on a hillside. And we kept sliding down all night. It's been very nice. And I think I'll go with this team to Eilat. Why not? Easy hitchhike and all. Me being with a couple of ladies made that kind of easy because even though I'm kind of a wild looking guy, the ladies can get you a ride. And that's a good formula for hitchhiking. Again, let's look at the map. You're going from Hebron down to Beersheba. It looks like we're on Route 60. Let's get the big picture. You can see Hebron lines up with the Dead Sea. Beersheba lined up with the bottom of the Red Sea. And it, of course, is a bit closer to the Mediterranean Sea. Let's look at an aerial view, which makes it look much better. You can see Jerusalem, Hebron, Beersheba. And, of course, hitchhiking, as I mentioned, with the ladies, which is easier, but also in Israel, you can easily get picked up by military. They'll shove you on the back of a truck. They actually gave us food. They would give us canned rations they had with them. I remember eating canned grapefruit. And the Israeli soldiers were all young people, just about our age, and having the women, of course, the men liked it, but there were a lot of women in the military too. But you're dealing with a huge military presence. We get into Beersheba after a couple hours, and guess what happens? We check into a little hotel, and we run into Al and Polly from the kibbutz. Well, that was fun. We walked around with them, but frankly, they were kind of a pain in the butt. And we kind of shook them off and got rid of them. And the next day, we decided, let's get back on our route. Let's go down along the route down to Eilat, which is where we were trying to go. And we wound up going to Masada. I was a bit of a student of history. Even as a young kid, I was fascinated. That's why I went traveling. And one of these places that was emblazoned in my mind was Masada. And as we left Beersheba, and I was with these other folks from the kibbutz, and Lynn and I and Donna, we got to Masada. We took the cable car up the mountain, and we came down the famous snake path. There is another path or trail that goes up the mountain. It's on the other side, and it's much more difficult. So we took the cable car up. It did exist in those days. And we came down the snake trail, which was a challenge as well. You get up here, and it's the end of the earth. And you know of the history that's made clear to you while you're there, the Zealots, who were Jews in the years after Jesus, actually, who the Romans had chased down because they wanted to make sure they had become other than Jews. And they wound up going up to this fortress that they built up on the top of this bluff in the middle of the desert. And the Romans fought their way up. And when they got to the top, they found that all of the Zealots had already committed suicide. They were dead. And there's where the word comes from. And from up there, you can see for miles and miles in all different directions. That's the Dead Sea off in the distance.
While Lynn, Donna, and I were on our way to Masada, somehow or another, Donna's money was ripped off, lost. And when we got off of Masada, she said, guys, I love you guys. You can go on your way to Eilat, but I'm going to go back to Tel Aviv to my embassy. I need to get some money. And we said goodbye to Donna, and Lynn and I went off down the road towards Eilat together.
Lynn and I, paling along, she was quite a nice young lady, and we had an opportunity over the nights together, even though Donna was there, that we had developed kind of a special kinship. We did see each other's souls, and I really enjoyed this young lady. And she was an attractive lady, and it was nice to get along with her. I didn't want to get involved really with anybody, but now I'm traveling alone with a young lady, which is something I really didn't want to do on this trip, but things happen. And she was a kind lady, and we had these grapefruits with us, and we were eating from the grapefruits in the desert. We could live on them. And we wind up hitchhiking along down towards Eilat, and we get to the Timna area, Timna Park. I knew the copper mines were up in that area, and it's about 30 miles north of Eilat. And it was getting dark, and it really isn't conducive to hitchhike in the dark. And we had our sleeping bag. So we thought, well, I said, why don't we sleep out in the desert? In fact, this is along the route of the Jordanian road, which is not far from there. And why don't we kind of traverse over towards the Jordanian area? And you see, the border wasn't far away. And, maybe we'll go to Jordan for the night. Lynn says, okay. So we kind of trekked out into the desert. It was getting dark, and we went out a few miles. I'm not sure how distant this is, and it really was truly no man's land. And at this time, there were guerrilla-type operations going on in the copper mines in Timna, and it was a known situation, and there was Israeli alerts on, security was going on, and the soldiers were there, and we knew this kind of stuff. But this is part of the fun of being a crazy young traveler, is that Steve decides, let's go to Jordan for the night. So we just walked out into the desert, and we don't know how far, and we said, let's lay down. We'll go behind a bush, and we won't see the lights from the road, and hopefully we'll just have a peaceful night and enjoy the desert. So we had some tokes, and we had some grapefruit, and we kind of sat, and I owned across the desert between the mountains on both sides, and my voice boomed out, and the sky was filled with wonderful stars, and then it glazed over with some cloudy night, and we sat, and then all of a sudden we looked over to the east, to the Jordanian side, and we could see a light coming towards us. We didn't know how far it was away from us because of the fact that across a flat desertscape like this, it's very difficult to tell the distance of things because there's nothing to stop the light. And it was hovering, and it seemed to have almost a metaphysical bearing to it, like it was outer space or something. And it looked really crazy, and it kept going across, and it looked out towards us, and we kind of, oh my gosh, we got a little tense, Lynn and I, and a lot of whispering to each other. I mean, it was still awful ways in the distance, but it was kind of scary, and it finally moved on after stopping and starting, and it stopped. We got our breath, and we started to read and write a bit and think, and it was a little scary just being out there, but we turned off our lights and tried to go to sleep. We did fall asleep sometime 2-3 o'clock in the morning, flashing overhead, rocket fire, shoo, shoo, 3, 4, 6, 8. Wow, I got our heart beating out of our chest. We were in mid-arc of the rocket fire. And then we could hear movement. And now the rocket fire was right over our heads and getting closer. And we could hear Israelis on our right, towards the south. And we could hear them talking, Shlomo. Blah, 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 blah. It was, Israelis due to these young soldiers because they apparently found out later were perusing the area looking for these guerrillas that I mentioned earlier. Well, they moved closer to us and they started firing the rockets again. We came to know immediately that a cough or any noise or anything they would see us could well be the ends of our lives. Finally, they moved on. You could hear their vehicles, their half-tracks, moving across the desert floor. Lights, more rocket fire one more time, just to show that they had seen our feet crossing, because we come to realize in the morning that they had set up army roads that allowed them to bring their half-tracks across the desert to survey the area, and they knew someone had come across, and that's why they were firing across to set off the warning shots. We woke up in the morning after just 2-3 hours sleep. We packed our things. The sun was coming up, a beautiful sunrise. We smoked what might have been our last bowl of Lebanese hashish, and Lynn and I crept towards the road and kissed the pavement.
We start week 21 at the timber copper mines after the incredible adventure of the night before, kissing the pavement. Stevie now with Lynn hitchhikes down to Eilat. They wind up comically running into Alan and Polly again. The four of them head down the shore of the Red Sea, find a beach, spend a few days. Stevie cuts his foot. Ultimately, Stevie and Lynn leave Alan and Polly behind and go on down into what is then the Israeli-held Sinai Peninsula. And this is something you can't do nowadays easily. And we wind up at the fjord and have a few days there that wind up with a romantic adventure and a lot of fun in the lovely lagoon-like water and the coral reefs and the fish and the sun and the sea.
We decide to rent bicycles for the day. We leave our belongings with the fellow who rents us the bikes. Then we head out on a tour of Jericho on our bikes. What a place, an oasis of garden green. The abundance of fruits is enormous. The tropical trees all around this low land are lush green against the brown earth. Water runs through this area everywhere. We pedal around through many of the antiquities in Jericho. We finally arrive at the walls of Jericho and the palace of Hirsham. My mind is ablaze with the thoughts of all the people and cultures that have existed here throughout history in the world's oldest city. This place on earth has experienced so much life. I feel a fusion, a connection of energy to the consciousness that has evolved in this place through a succession of human inhabitants. Jericho is a mystical place forevermore to me. Donna, Lisa, and I decide that we should get going south to Jerusalem and the Dead Sea today, then further south. Back on the road, we do a lot of sightseeing, staying in the new city while driving past ancient walls surrounding the old city. I will need to come back to this incredible part of the world when I have the time to really explore some of the iconic places, but once again, not today. I start hitching south with Donna and Lisa. We hitch a short ride to Bethlehem, which is a small, dusty Arab Christian town where we visit the Church of the Nativity, where lore has it Christ was born. Then we hitch a ride to Hebron, another Arab town. The three of us explore the vibrant market area. We enjoy a meal of lamb, pita, and hummus together amongst the friendly locals. Then we get a short ride out of town to sleep on a hillside.